Hi, class. Welcome to our last section on Chapter 5. We've been on Chapter 5 for quite some time now, and we are now on our last lesson, 5.9, continued 5.9, Day 2. So what we're talking about in this lesson, we're kind of putting two things that we really enjoy doing and putting them together, such as I love eating ice cream. It's great. And I love eating Oreo cookies. So what do I love even more? Eating ice cream and Oreo cookies together, right? That's good stuff. I love to sing. Singing is just a great hobby of mine, and I love sitting around a campfire. The mesmerizing flames, you're just out with friends and it's a grand old time. So what is the best of both worlds? Singing around a campfire. It's wonderful. One more analogy, I love hanging out with friends, getting together with buddies that I had in high school or college, getting together, it's great. And I love eating Applebee's, such as the honey barbecue boneless wings. Just delicious. So what do I like even more than both of those separately? Both of them together. Having Applebee's with friends. Oh, it's a wonderful thing. So I know that you guys loved the lesson from 2 days ago, which was solving equations with radical and rational equations. You guys enjoyed doing that. And I know that you enjoyed yesterday's lesson, which was imaginary numbers. So what are you going to enjoy even more than those two separately? Those two together. So today's lesson, we're going to be solving equations using complex numbers. So we're solving, and we're also going to have answers with i's in them, which are imaginary. And now this joke on the screen here is great. If you haven't read it yet, it's hilarious. You're going to enjoy laughing at this one. This is a joke that has been around for many, 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 many years. And up until yesterday, you weren't able to understand this joke and really laugh at it. But this I symbol and the pi symbol, they're kind of having a little verbal battle back and forth, right? They're kind of taunting each other, a little bit of trash talk. And the I says to the pi symbol, hey, yo, dog, get rational. You know what I'm saying? Just get rational, because the pi symbol is obviously irrational. 3.1415926535789. It's just a long decimal answer that goes on forever. And so the pi symbol isn't just going to take that insult, it's going to give it back. And it's going to say, you know what, imaginary, get real. Because imaginary symbol is imaginary, right? It's not real. So it's hilarious. And I know that you enjoyed laughing at that as much as I enjoyed explaining it. So here's what we got. We have an equation here. We want to get x all by itself. So let's get this x and let's isolate it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to subtract 48. So now we have 3x squared equals a negative 48. Secondly, in order to get rid of this 3, I have to divide by it. So now we have x squared all by itself, and a negative 48 divided by a negative 3 is a negative 16. So x squared equals a negative 16. And now the opposite of squaring something is square rooting it. So to get this x all by itself, I have to square root both sides. Now this cancels. All I'm left with is a 6. All I'm left with is an x. And on the right side, I have, whenever you take the square root of something, you need the positive and the negative. So it's plus and minus the square root of a negative 16. 2 days ago, you put no solution or the empty set. Now today, you know that the square root of a negative 16 is a value even though it's imaginary. It's the same thing as the square root of 16 multiplied by a negative 1. So what's the square root of 16? 4. What's the square root of a negative 1? I. So my answer, x equals plus and minus 4i. And I circle my answer and I'm done. Class, I'm not going to require you to check your work on these. You don't have to, because you're not going to get any extraneous solutions. But it always is a good idea, and if you want to be certain you have the right answer, you can check your work. So I'm going to check my work once on the smartboard here with you so that you know how to do it if you want to do it on your own. So let's just try the positive 4i. So x, this equals 4i. So as I check my work, we have 3 multiplied by 4i, that quantity squared, plus 48. It equals 0. Let's see if the left side and the right side do indeed equal each other. So we're going to follow order of operations. We're going to do exponents first. So 4i times 4i is 16i squared. Now, we know what I squared equals. I squared is the same thing as a negative 1. So it's 3 times 16 times a negative 1, which is a negative 16. Now we're going to multiply. 3 times a negative 16 is a negative 48. Plus 48 equals 0. And lastly, we're going to add a negative 48 plus 48 is 0. 0 equals 0. It checks out. I know that a positive 4i is my answer. I could do the same thing for a negative 4i, and I would still get 0 equals 0. So I'm not going to check my work on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, but if you guys want to, you can check your work on every single one of these to make sure that the left side equals the right side. Let's practice another one. I want to get this x all by itself, so let's add 84 first. A negative 2x squared on the left equals 100 on the right. I divide both sides by a negative 2, so x squared equals a negative 50. And then, to get x all by itself, I square root both sides. So when I square root a negative 50, I get imaginary number again, don't I? X equals, we're always talking about plus and minus when we take the square root of both sides. And this breaks up into 25 times 2 times a negative 1. The 25 comes out as a 5, the negative 1 comes out as an I, and the square root of 2 stays inside the radical. So for number 2, x equals plus and minus 5i square root 2. After looking at numbers 1 and 2, hopefully you have a good understanding about how to do these. You try number 3 on your own. Unpausing the video, here's what you should have got. Subtracting 2, 4x squared equals a negative 32. Dividing both sides by 4, x squared equals a negative 8. And then square rooting both sides. X equals plus and minus 4, 2, negative 1. So it would be 2i square root 2. There's your answer for number 3. X equals plus and minus 2i square root 2. Number 4, a little bit different. We're going to subtract 7 from both sides as we have on the previous ones. 16x squared equals a negative 1. Now we got to get x squared all by itself, and the way we do that is by dividing both sides by 16. So x squared equals a negative 1/16. So now when we square root both sides, we're square rooting a fraction. So we haven't really done too much of that just yet, but the process is still the same. X equals plus and minus the square root of a negative 1/16. So what we can do here, class, is we can break this up into a negative 1 times a positive 1/16. So now we know that we're going to have an I in our answer because we have the square root of a negative 1. So I know I'm going to have an I in my answer. Now when we take the square root of this 1/16, you just take the square root of the numerator and the square root of the denominator. The square root of the numerator, which is 1, the square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 16 is 4. So there's your answer. X equals plus and minus 1/4 multiplied by I. X equals plus and minus 1/4 times I. Number 5, let's try another one very similar to that. 9x squared equals a negative 16. Once I get the 9x squared by itself, I have to divide both sides by 9. So x squared equals a negative 16/9. And then we square root both sides. We're going to square root the 16. So we're going to have plus and minus of 4 in the numerator. We're going to square root the 9 in the denominator to get a 3. And we know because it's a negative sign right here that we're going to have an I in it. So plus and minus 4/3 I is the answer for number 5. All right, you guys had some practice on numbers 4 and number 5. So now you try number 6 on your own. Very, very similar to 4 and 5. Unpausing the video, I believe you did this first. You subtracted 25 to give us 64x squared equals a negative 25. After you did this, you divided both sides by 64. So you got x squared equals a negative 25/64. And then, I'm sure you square rooted both sides. So you got x to equal plus and minus. The square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 64 is 8. And this negative 1 makes an I. So x equals plus and minus 5/8 times I. Once again, class, at any time you could check these answers by going through on the right side and making sure that the left side equals the right side. And if it does, you know with 100% certainty that you did them correct. Number 7 is a slight doozy because it doesn't come out really clean, but that's all right. We are going to square root both sides. And that way we're going to get 7x minus 2 all by itself. So 7x minus 2, that equals plus and minus. Now this is the same thing as 66 multiplied by a negative 1. So I can't reduce this 66. The only factors are 1 times 66, 2 times 33, 3 times 22, and 6 times 11. I believe those are the only factors. And none of these are perfect squares, so I can't reduce 66. So all I can do is just take out the negative 1 to make it an I. So I times the square root of 66. So once I have that, I'm going to add 2 here to get 7x all by itself. So I'm going to add 2. Now you can't add numbers and imaginary numbers. Remember how we always keep those separately? You combine like terms. So 7x equals, this 2 comes first because it's standard form, plus and minus I square root 66. I can't combine anything more on the left side. I's can only be combined with other i's. These numbers can only be combined with other numbers. So we just have to leave it like that. So then our last step, to get x all by itself, let's divide both sides by 7. So 7 divided by 7 cancels. X equals, and we can just leave the right side just the way it is, 2 plus and minus I square root 66 over 7. It's messy, but it's as far as we can solve. So our answer, x equals 2 plus and minus I square root 66 over 7. This is the last lesson for chapter 5. So our homework assignment is this worksheet, 5.9a, and then objective 671. Once you're done with 71, you're ready to take the test. So make sure that you do the review, ask me any questions if you have them, and prepare yourself for that test. And the last little bit here of our chapter 9 notes, chapter 8 notes, chapter 5 notes is this 8, he says to the 2 and the 3, hey, you guys want to meet my new friend? And then this 8, the 2 and the 3 says, sure, but where is he? And the 8, he's like, hey, he's right here. Don't you see him? And then, this 8, he has an imaginary friend, right? It's the square root of a negative 1. His friend is imaginary. It's funny. I love it. So that is what I'll end with for chapter 9. That's what I'll end with for chapter 5.